All right, so we are going to start with ancient civilizations today, and we're going to talk about the Mayans first. So here is a map of the Mayan world. So if you look, it's in Mexico. It goes into like Honduras and Guatemala. The location is on the Yucatan Peninsula, and the year was 250 to 900. The fall of the empire was archaeologists. They suspect it was because of the lack of food and the extreme intake of natural resources. Also, there was a war in the 1500s, and that contributed to their decline. Today, Mayans still live in Mexico and other parts of Central America. So the government of the Mayans, they had kings with absolute authority. So it's like a monarchy, which is, where kings and queens rule. But it has like a dictatorship combined because they control everything. They started to overtake the leaders and the small farming communities. Kings were kind of like deities in the fact that they were able to speak directly to their gods. And, that's a huge deal to the people. So their kings were almost like worshiped themselves because they, were in very close connection with the gods. And the Mayans put a lot of belief in their gods. So because of this, their rulers being able to speak to the gods, the relationship of government and religion was very close, which typically we don't see that, especially today. So speaking of their religion, as I said, they worship nature gods, and the gods of sun, rain, and corn are very important to them. They also have a high importance in astrology. So they chart the stars and they try to determine what the gods were going to do based on the stars and how they were aligned and what the sky looked like at night. So they put a high importance in astrology. They also had animal sacrifice rituals, and this was to, offer these animals to the gods to thank them and worship them, show their appreciation in hopes that the gods would take care of them in return. Mayan rulers were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, as I said. So they were semi-divine. They weren't as, they believed that they were the connection between the gods and themselves. So they didn't believe that they were actually gods, but they definitely had a lot of power, and they were viewed as, very high up on the totem pole. They also were buried in like these huge elaborate tombs, with all of these variable offerings so that they could have them in the afterlife. The social structure of the Mayans, they were born into their social status. So whatever your father was or your mother was, that's what you became as well. Like I said, example, if your father was a warrior, then that's what you grew up to be. You were born into it. You really couldn't get out of your social status or move up or down. Most of the Mayans were farmers. Farming was like a huge thing to them. It was a huge resource. And besides the kings, obviously, it says the most powerful men in the empire were priests, followed by the ruling family, and then nobles also lived a life of luxury. Slaves had no rights. So they did have slaves. Mayans did have slaves, but they had no rights whatsoever. Technology. So the Mayans were perhaps the first people to use the number 0, which is extremely interesting to me. They had an advanced system of astronomy, like I talked about earlier, and they studied the sky, such as the sun, moon, planets, stars. They studied all of this even way back then. They also developed a calendar using their knowledge of astronomy and math, and it's very similar to the one that we use today. Agricultural practices. The Mayans used a variety of methods for agriculture that depended on their location, just like it is today. So they were hunters and gatherers. They fished and hunted wild animals, gathered fruits and vegetables, but they also used this technique called slash and burn, where they would cut down the forest with axes and then let the trees dry out. After they dried, they would then burn the trees and clear the land. So after they would do this and they would burn up all the wood and the trees and everything in it, the ashes were then fertilizer for their crops. And this was actually very good because then the crops could grow quickly and it was very good soil for them to use. The only bad part about this is that after they, grew the crops, they burned everything down, well, then the land couldn't be used again for 2 to 3 years. So it was good very fast, but as we said, one of their downfalls was that they went through all of their natural resources rather quickly. So just like it says, like this slash and burn method, it was great for a short-term benefit, but long-term, it was not a great method. They grow a variety of different crops: maize, which is like corn, beans, chilies, and other peppers, squashes, tomatoes, avocados or avocados, pumpkins, cotton, and fruit orchards. The cocoa plants in some places were turned into chocolate. Some people say that the Mayans invented chocolate. Irrigation. So where the Mayans lived, the Yucatan Peninsula, drought was like a really big deal there. It was a huge concern for them. So water obviously was a big concern because if they couldn't water their crops, they would dry out and die. So what the Mayans did is they built water reservoirs. Basically, they made a man-made dam, created an irrigation system so that they could hold the water in one place and then put it where they needed with the crops when they needed it. So that was also, they used irrigation a lot, it just blows my mind how far advanced that they were back then. And lastly, the religion and agriculture kind of went together for the Mayans because, they believed that if they worshiped the gods, they would have a good season for their crops. So the priest would actually choose which days to plant and harvest. He was in connection, with the god, so they believed that he could talk to them and figure out the best days to plant, harvest, etc. And then they would pray to the god of rain to help water their plants and, help them grow. So religion kind of had a hand in everything that the Mayans did. Products. So they created a writing system made up of symbols, and the symbols stood for sound. So they weren't exactly letters, but they were symbols for sounds. They had stelae, which are large upright stone monuments, and hieroglyphics. They had dates, historical events, information about rulers, religious ceremonies. All of that was like written in hieroglyphics on their walls. And their information was recorded every 20 years. So they had their own system for like keeping track of, like I said, major historical events or dates. And that's how they sort of kept record of everything that happened. The Mayans were also involved in trading, and they used a barter system. So obviously they used different foods to trade, such as salt, honey, fish, turtle eggs, deer meat, birds, fruit, and vegetables. They also traded goods such as cotton, animal skin, feathers, shells, gold, emeralds, jade, and valuable stones. And sadly, slaves were also bought and sold at these marketplaces. So what you guys are going to do is you have to, here are a few examples of the nature gods that the Mayans celebrated. They celebrated the god of bees, thunder, death, hunt, earth, medicine and good health, rain and storms, war, mountains, woods, and wild nature. So I want you to pick one of the gods above and draw a picture of what you think this God might look like and describe in 2 sentences or more what you think this God would do. So if you want to draw a picture, on a piece of paper and then just handwrite it, that's fine. You can do that. Or if you want to create it on some online drawing app, or you can even use like Google Docs to insert it in there, that I'm fine with that too. So somehow you have to pick a god above, create what it looks like, and write at least 2 sentences what you think this god would do, why it would be important, or what they are in charge of. Be creative.